Greetings and welcome back to the newest installment of the podcast and video series, A New Leviathan. Today, I'm here to talk about an issue that is very important because it affects each and every person who lives in America, and it has a very big impact on your future and the kinds of values you want to see our country adopt. That is the question of healthcare in this country and how it is managed by the government. Now, the first thing I'd like to address is how various things over the years have attempted to change how healthcare operates in the United States. This is mostly coming from the left wing of American politics, who seem to have an incessant want and an incessant need to regulate American healthcare and have the government take a greater investment into it rather than simply letting private companies and doctors manage their own situations. Firstly, we have to look back at the very first programs put into place to help regulate healthcare in some way. These would be Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. These three programs would be part of what was called the Great Society of the 1960s that would propose the idea that the government should have some regulations in place to help the average person. Now, regardless of what you might be thinking, I actually do believe that these programs, while somewhat ineffectively run today, were a net positive at the time that they were introduced and still are to this day. The more disturbing thing about them is how often the left seems to use them as political tools. They have this very strong tactic that I like to call, just because it's catchy, the Medicare scare, as well as the triple S scare. That would be the Social Security scare. That is, every single election cycle, the left wing, the Democratic Party, always runs on a campaign stating that the Republican Party, the right wing, is going to destroy in some way Medicare and Social Security. This is particularly attempting to appeal to older voters who rely on these programs the most. That is a demographic that the Democratic Party has basically no other standings in because they've completely eschewed the traditional values of older generations. So they attempt to gain votes through this Medicare scare, even though it is a completely ridiculous thing to do because it has been proven time and time again that nothing happens. This is what they say. They say the triple S scare, the Medicare scare, the Republicans are going to run and they're going to destroy and defund Social Security and Medicare once they get into office. They get into office and nothing happens to change these programs. And if anything does happen, it's likely just to cut down on bureaucracy, never to eliminate the program as they try to do in their campaign scare tactics. But the question is, why do I approve of Medicare and Social Security? Why do I think that they are good times where the government intervenes in some type of the healthcare process, and when are they time? And why do I believe that they are different from other situations? Well, allow me to explain this. The key difference in Social Security and Medicare and other types of welfare is the way in which it is saved up. If you are on Social Security, which everyone who is a legal documented citizen is, which 20 years ago would have meant everyone in America, but nowadays, thanks to Joe Biden, we have quite a few people who don't meet that definition yet still live here. So if you are a legal citizen, you are paying into your Social Security your whole life. Every time that you make an income, you have to pay a certain amount into Social Security. And this shows that it is essentially your work and your money going into your own Social Security account. Unfortunately, there are additional costs associated with the bureaucracy that manages it, but for the most part, the actual money and the services of Social Security are saved up by you throughout your life, which are then given back to you near the end. Already, this shows that, yes, this seems to be a pretty fair deal. A person saves up money their entire life that gets taken out of their income, but unlike other forms of the government taking money from you, like income taxes or the various other taxes that the left constantly hikes higher and higher, you do actually get this money back at the end of your life. It's sort of intended to be a saving program that the government forces you to engage in so that you will have enough money for your retirement. Makes sense, right? It seems like a good program. So, when does the left go too far and violate this principle and create government welfare programs for the healthcare industry that are simply complete disasters? Well, I would say that the first time that they have really dropped the ball on attempting to do something positive for the healthcare industry would be with the advent of Obamacare. That is the Affordable Care Act, as it's officially known instead of commonly known. This act that was passed drastically changed the American healthcare system. It enacted a bunch of new restrictions on what healthcare companies have to cover, what kind of plans they have to offer, as well as increasing costs for large employers to buy insurance for their employees, and increasing penalties and fees related to large employers and large corporations buying insurance at all. This program claimed that it would be somehow make healthcare more affordable, or that through this, people would be getting a fair deal where people who are too vulnerable and do not have enough money to purchase healthcare in the normal way can get healthcare. However, this program is completely unfair and, in my opinion, very, very negative for the American public, the types of healthcare that they have access to, as well as their own rights to basic freedom. One of the biggest negatives, downsides to this Obamacare passage was the amount of people that had their private healthcare plans canceled. Even though President Obama gave an assurance that if you like your private insurance, you can keep it. However, that trust was completely violated when, because Obamacare added many new restrictions that companies were required to follow in issuing healthcare policies and what they had to cover, thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact, of people lost their healthcare plans because they were canceled for not meeting Obamacare regulations. Additionally, many more healthcare companies would report that they had troubles making profits and keeping their operation business effective after the Obamacare regulations greatly increased the amount of costs that they had to spend meeting said regulations through the various for their various healthcare programs that they were offering. Additionally, it enacted other measures such as the individual mandate. Now, this was actually one interesting part of Obamacare that was the single part that has been successfully repealed, and it was repealed by President Trump in the Tax Cuts Act of 2017, even though a separate bill to completely repeal Obamacare failed in the Senate. This bill did actually pass, so the individual mandate is fortunately no more and has not yet been reinstated by Biden. This was one of the most controversial aspects of the Obamacare situation, wherein people who were not in the Obamacare system, who did not buy Obamacare subsidized government insurance, were charged with a mandate fee, an additional tax for not joining into the system. This tax many felt was highly unfair and questioned why the government would tax them extra for simply not signing up for government welfare. The reason was this, and it was exposed by multiple economists as being the truth of the matter. If only the types of people who used welfare regularly and needed Obamacare programs because they could not buy healthcare themselves went onto Obamacare, the insurance costs for the government would be unreasonably high. That is because those same types of people were the people who were the most likely to get sick because of the living conditions that they unfortunately have, because these types of people obviously are the ones who are paying into the system the least, and because they go to the doctor the most frequently because of these health conditions. Oftentimes, debilitating health conditions cause people to have less money because of the costs associated with that. Because of that, they stated that government insurance costs under Obamacare were estimated to be far too high to be reasonable or practical for federal government spending if only high cost but low giving members of society, the very, very poor, signed up onto this program. They stated that they needed people who were healthy, a large amount of them, and who had higher incomes to sign up for the program in order to make it cost effective. Now, obviously, it would be unconstitutional for them to force people to go on the Obamacare programs, to force them to buy Obamacare insurance, regardless of what the left might have dreamed and wanted they could do. So, for that reason, the individual mandate was put into place to punish those who did not sign up for the Obamacare insurance program, because if they did not have this feeling that they were supposed to sign up for it, the program would be even more expensive than it was in actuality if the only people on it were frequent and high-cost individuals instead of having low-cost individuals at the top to balance things out. Already, even with how disastrous Obamacare was for the American healthcare industry, for how many people it hurt, for how many people it caused to lose their own healthcare, as well as how many companies and doctors in the private healthcare industry were harmed by having to spend a ridiculously high amount on new government regulations that oftentimes were not even that effective. Now they are proposing something further. The newer proposals from the left wing include ideas such as universal healthcare, akin to their favorite example, the Scandinavian nations. Or, for example, their idea of Medicare for all. That is a proposed expansion of Medicare beyond the elderly demographic that it was originally targeted at. However, this is simply a... However, when we come into this, we see that the left can clearly be shown to have little respect for the American people in how they plan to implement these. Remember earlier when I said that I do not have a problem with Social Security or Medicare, and that I think these programs are a positive for society? Well, the reason I believe that is because of how the money is obtained. Social Security is simply an individual being required by their government to give a certain amount of money to be spent and saved up later, so that when they eventually come to their retirement, they will have enough money saved up, regardless of whether they took the initiative to do things such as saving themselves. It automatically saves for them. In this case, it is one person saving up their money and later being able to cash in that money, the designated amount that the government gives you each month. That seems to be a fair system. Unfortunately, now that's been bloated a bit with bureaucracy, but that seems to be a fair system. A person pays for their own healthcare and a person pays for their own savings. However, these new programs from the left, Medicare for All and universal healthcare proposals, completely violate this by instead proposing the idea that these proposals should be what they call single payer. Now, single payer is really a miscommunication of how these programs actually work. And I believe it is intentional on the part of the left wing to make these programs sound better. Alongside names like free healthcare, which is completely ridiculous because nothing is ever free. Its costs will always come from somewhere, even if it seems like you aren't paying for anything. Additionally, the idea of single-payer healthcare is really an inaccurate one, because a better and more accurate name for it would be all-payer healthcare. Because if you are a legal tax-paying citizen, again, everyone except the people that Joe Biden is letting in at the border, you are required to pay income tax and pay various other types of taxes. Because of that, what is happening with this universal health care is that everyone in America, all of our legal citizens, are being forced to give up parts of their income or parts of their money in other ways through property or payroll tax to finance the health care of others. Again, we can see that this is a morally complex issue, and this is one where it seems that the left is lacking in the respect for the fundamental American value of freedom and for individual responsibility. People have enough trouble trying to provide for themselves and those that they know personally and deal with their own costs in life. But now they're expecting American individuals to go a step further and pay for the health care of people halfway across the country that they do not even know through this single-payer taxation scheme. And you might wonder, well, This program, of course, while negative for many people who will be losing and seeing their wealth dissipate as they are forced to pay higher taxes because, of course, if this program was enacted, the government would be spending more on universal health care or Medicare for all or whatever program that you have. As we can see already, healthcare spending in America takes up a substantial chunk of the federal budget. This is especially true under President Biden, who has increased this funding a lot as part of the left-wing scheme to promote the idea that they are spending more money on healthcare and somehow bettering the situation through this healthcare welfare scheme in order to appeal more to their left-wing college base. However, we can see that, simply put, this is doing is taking away from hardworking Americans and violating the principle that an individual should be responsible for paying for his own health care instead of having to bail out the health care of others. Now, you might be thinking, well, to some extent, you have to have a limit, right? I mean, you have to have some type of charity and generosity for those who are unable to afford things themselves, particularly healthcare, which is a very touchy subject, as well as, of course, you have to think we have to have some limit. We have to have some kind of charity and generosity for the poor, particularly those who cannot afford healthcare in some way. And I say to you, yes, I would completely agree with that. However, I personally do not believe that the forced taking of people's money through taxes is the ideal way to achieve this versus the voluntary donations through private charity. Additionally, some people might say things like, oh, well, Additionally, people might say things such as, oh, well, if it's universal healthcare, yes, you'll be paying for the healthcare of millions of other people across the country that you will never see any benefit from. But if the healthcare program is truly universal, you can use it as well. So yes, you're paying for other people's, but you're also paying for a healthcare system that does benefit you and that you yourself can use. Well, I'd just like to state, though, that I believe that there is a good reason why many people, particularly those who do not need to be going on a government welfare healthcare program who can pay for their own private insurance, would greatly prefer to stay on private insurance. According to a public opinion poll done by The Hill, when surveyed out of 1,000 Americans, 55% stated that they believe the government should take a bigger intervention into healthcare. Now, of course, public opinion polls don't mean much about what is right because people can easily be swayed one way or the other. But the interesting part of this is the second question that they asked them. While 55% of respondents said that they thought the government should take a bigger role in managing healthcare, when asked, would you prefer the system to be predominantly run by government with minimal interventions from private systems, or predominantly run by private systems with minimal intervention from government, 53% of respondents stated that they would prefer that their healthcare system is primarily run by private insurance. Because we can see this, we can see that Americans do tend to like their private insurance plans. And why shouldn't they? These are companies that many people have been with for decades, constantly and consistently paying into and making deals with to keep their own private healthcare plan that they personally have seen some benefit from. We can see that the left, however, doesn't like the idea of private healthcare plans because they seemed all too happy during the Obamacare crisis to simply let 250,000 people lose their private insurance plans due to excessive government regulations that forced many private insurance companies to shut down plans that were previously viable. Additionally, some might wonder, well, just take a look at the Nordic countries, which the left is often talking about, particularly Bernie Sanders, or Canada, or Great Britain, or basically every other Western nation. They all have universal health care of some type. Why doesn't America enact it? And I say simply that the reason we have not enacted it is because these countries are also misguided heavily. The Canadian healthcare system, in particular, has been suffering from some huge scandals around their use of human euthanization, which is a very gruesome subject and something that has gotten them a lot of criticism. In particular, multiple stories have come out of people who have received euthanization from the Canadian healthcare system, which is, of course, single payer, or it might look like to you free, even though everyone in Canada is paying it from it through their income tax, for reasons for ridiculous things such as hearing loss, or in one case where they recommended euthanization to a homeless disabled veteran. These are absolutely terrible scandals and have had a terrible reflection on the brutality and the reality of running a universal healthcare system. It is simply something that is just not attainable due to the high costs that are associated with it. In Great Britain, another universal healthcare system nation, delays for surgeries and various other healthcare procedures have become notorious in the country. There are more than 8 million people currently on their healthcare system, the NHS's waiting list. Not only that, as we can see by this graph here, the waiting times in Great Britain compared to the United States are much, much higher, with you having to wait over 100 weeks to get something so simple as going to the dentist, compared to only about 20 in the United States. That simply is a ridiculous cost. Additionally, we can see that cancer deaths are actually higher in the United Kingdom in the United States. Why is that? Well, I'd suggest that a good reason for that is the long waiting times they make people go through for surgeries. And I believe that these long waiting times are a direct byproduct of the universal healthcare systems that they have enabled. For example, I believe that the basic principle that the second that you start offering something that is for free, it's single payer by taxes, no government profit is made that can be invested back into the system, only tax money that is spent on, amongst various other things, in the system the first time, the quality of what it is that you are offering is going to drastically go down because you don't have that investment factor. Additionally, it has been seen as a common issue that when everyone can get healthcare without a direct cost, that is, there's always a cost, it's just not direct. They'll tell you it's free, they just won't say that up front. They'll sneak it in through the single payer system of the income tax and various other high taxes. When everyone can get this healthcare without seeing a direct cost, especially those who usually cannot afford healthcare themselves because they pay less taxes, because if you have a smaller income, you pay less in taxes, it will actually increase the waiting times a lot because there will be delays in the system because everyone will be able to go to the doctor whenever they want, even if they really do not need to, because they will not see that importance of budgeting because they think that it appears completely free to them, even though they are simply increasing their own taxes through increasing the strain of the system. Again, looking back at the left's favorite countries, Scandinavia, we can see that their own healthcare systems have been suffering through extensive bureaucracy and the negative effects of universal healthcare. Particularly in the country of Sweden, there was a famous report that came out where, particularly in the country of Sweden, the largest Scandinavian nation, there was a famous report that came out where when asked about whether they felt overworked and whether they believed that being overworked was due to the unique type of healthcare system seen in Sweden, 76% of Swedish doctors responded that they believed that they felt extremely overworked, and a majority of them, in fact, 57%, stated that they believed Sweden's healthcare system, the universal healthcare system implemented in Sweden, was the reason that they were often overworked, which makes sense because so many people are all going to the same medical care institution because once you make this government healthcare system, the influence and the promotion of private healthcare plans will drastically decrease in the country, which is seen in most other Western nations such as Canada, the United Kingdom, and the Scandinavian countries such as Sweden, where having private insurance is much more uncommon than in America, of course. It can be seen that once everyone is going to the same institution for their healthcare, that is only the government-run institution because they see it as free, regardless of the quality of the healthcare that they are getting, with high waiting times, bizarre things such as proposals of euthanization, and extremely overworked systems where doctors themselves are saying that they believe that this universal healthcare system is the reason for all of their problems and is the reason for all of these delays in a clogged up system. Simply put, universal healthcare is nowhere near as good as they promote it as. And most of all, this idea that it is a institution that is completely free and that is completely run off of charity, completely run off of the charitable feelings of the government is simply untrue, because so many people are paying for this. In fact, the most interesting thing to think about is that the people who are likely to use universal healthcare the most, that is the people who currently do not have a private healthcare plan that they like, which is likely to be lower income people, are the ones who contribute the least back into the system to help pay for this universal healthcare proposal if it was to be enacted in the United States. Because if you have a lower income, you pay less taxes. Because of this, we are seeing that the government is creating a system that they say will help the lower class. Okay, sure, it might help the lower class somewhat, but is it truly fair to maybe marginally improve the conditions of the lower class who might be able to now get healthcare, even if they have to wait over 100 weeks for it, in a situation where the quality of the healthcare that they get is drastically reduced from what they would be able to gain if they had simply worked to be able to afford a private insurance plan in the first place, at the cost of the upper and middle classes' rights to keep their own income and their own wealth that they have stored up. Well, some might say that that is a good thing. Many on the left would say that they believe in this sort of Robin Hood idea that, well, the government has a duty to provide for those who are the lowest, and if we have to take a little bit from those who are in the middle and upper classes, that's simply okay. I personally do not believe that that is an acceptable system. But before anyone protests too much, I'd like to examine another thing. That is the claim that, well, if we take all this tax money from the upper and middle classes and only a little bit from the lower classes and create this universal healthcare system, or perhaps an expansion of Medicare and Medicaid to increase the amount of people that are eligible for it, even if they're not seniors or aren't even that poor, it would benefit the lower class, right? Well, strangely enough, even with all of the downsides that they bring, with increased waiting times and people being forced to give up their income through income tax, the claimed benefits of universal health care that the left claims will help the least fortunate in our country are simply not there. In fact, studies, such as one done by the Cato Institute, have shown that in various government welfare programs, up to 70% of the money raised to be spent on the budgeting for certain government assistance programs gets spent upholding bureaucracies, paying officials, and various fees associated with managing the program, where only 30% actually went to the poor. See, as we look at this, we can see that it is very likely that in a system as large as the universal healthcare system, which could be akin to something that we are already seeing in the United Kingdom with their NHS, with an 8 million person waiting list, likely to be 3 times as large in the United States, considering how much larger our population is than England's, that they would be spending an insane amount on bureaucracy for such a large program. It would likely be the largest government welfare program designed yet in the United States if we were to implement free, single-payer government healthcare. If this was to be put into place, can you even imagine how much would be spent on bureaucracy versus actually helping the poor? So we are seeing a proposed system where it is very likely that the people who have the most, the people who have the most economic value in our country, that is the people who have the most money, the people who have worked the hardest to make the most money and become the richest, as well as those in the middle classes, a little bit less, as well as those in the lowest class, only a little bit, are forced to all give up some of their income to pay into a proposed maybe Medicare for all expansion, which completely eschews the original meaning of Medicare, which is for the seniors who have worked the hardest to deserve to enjoy their retirement to more people, are seeing their wealth being taken away from them, being told that it will help the poor in some way, that it will be a positive system, even though it won't really teach people how to make more money. It'll just make them dependent upon getting government welfare. Even though it is very likely that the majority of their money will not actually go to any kind of well-run government welfare assistance program, but rather a simply messy system that will cause huge delays in healthcare for people of all incomes and of all situations, with most of their money going on some type of government bureaucracy management and the upholding of this original government system that designed this entire labyrinth of a universal healthcare system wherein people have their basic freedoms taken away from them, their basic freedom to say that, well, I can choose to donate to charity when I believe it is a good charitable cause, versus being forced to give up their money in income tax to a program that they might think is very badly managed and does not actually give that much benefit to anyone in the American populace. Simply put, I believe that it is time for both parties and both sides in America to take a real look at how we manage healthcare and take a real look at what will actually benefit the American populace. I can believe that, although the left wing is definitely worse on this, both parties have dropped the ball somewhat when it comes to truly taking charge of government healthcare and truly doing it in a way that is a Leviathan nation, doing it in a way that is akin to the idea of a government truly helping its citizens, even if it comes at a sacrifice to some people. Now, some people might say, well, why doesn't that apply to the Robin Hood idea, that some people have to sacrifice their own wealth for the common good of all? But I do not believe that it is in the common good of all to have all Americans see their taxes increase drastically for a system that will likely be very poorly managed and could result in America seeing a nightmarish situation such as in England, where people are waiting 98 days to get elective surgeries. Simply put, it is a better idea for us to take a look as the Leviathan nation to perhaps say that for the benefit of the whole country, it would be to the benefit to preserve the fundamental American ideals of individual rights, individual responsibility, individual freedom to choose your own private healthcare plan, but more importantly, only be responsible for paying for your own healthcare, and perhaps take a look at the idea of doing something that is more meritable to benefit the whole American populace than to enact this haphazard universal healthcare system that would likely take far too much and give far too little benefit. I believe that one way we could take a look at this is by analyzing and thinking about the problems that are left untalked about instead of the ones that are talked about too much. For example, veterans' healthcare insurance. I scarcely ever hear politicians on the left wing, and even sometimes on the right, talk about the Veterans Administration or the need for a good healthcare system to resolve crises such as the sad fate of the homeless veterans, versus the amount of times that they spend talking about things like student loan forgiveness or universal healthcare for all, that they target more just at anyone who currently is currently on unemployment and not able to get healthcare because they don't have a job. I think that we need to take a look at issues like this. That's an example of someone that I think, regardless of whether they're paying for their own healthcare or not, would definitely be deserving of this Robin Hood idea. If someone has literally given their life for this nation in service through our military and veterans, it is simply anything lower. It is nothing less than dishonorable to not give them the best care and the best reward and the best benefit for making these incredible sacrifices that they do. Currently, although many would say that they do get a lot better benefits than most people, the Veterans Administration has come under a lot of criticism for for being extremely bureaucratic. Remember what I said earlier, that 70-30 ratio. 70% actually going to government bureaucracy, 30% actually going to welfare programs for the poor out of spending for various government welfare programs. So why don't we have both parties take a look at who could really benefit at who truly deserves, based off merit, not off demand, merit from those who have earned it rather than demand from those who ideologically promote it on the left wing, the meritorious idea of perhaps fixing our veterans' healthcare insurance and perhaps creating some sort of lower cost model for them, which I believe a lot less people would have a problem giving up some of their tax dollars to do if the program was genuinely good, well managed, and cut down on bureaucracy. I'd like to hear that most of the money was actually going to the veterans and to those who needed it rather than to bureaucracy, which is the current way that many of our systems are being run, according to this study. Additionally, things like the actual original purpose of Medicare, not for all. Medicare should not be for all because it is designed to benefit not all age groups. It is designed to benefit the seniors of this nation. It is designed to benefit those who have worked their entire lives and who have been saving, just like the Social Security. That, in my opinion, is a good model because that one, if the bureaucracy is cut down on and made more efficient for people to be able to actually manage their own money well and understand what is going on with it, that occurs in what the government is actually doing with it, that I believe is a perfect system and a good example of a system where people are responsible for, in most cases, saving up this money over their entire life that later results in a great benefit to them when they retire. And of course, seniors deserve to be able to enjoy their retirement after they have earned the merit of working their entire lives and giving so much to this country. Veterans deserve a lot after they have done so many meritorious things for this country. But it is not meritable, and it is never a good idea to enact this universal healthcare system for all that, especially with America's very large population in the world, would be extremely expensive and likely very badly run and would likely only result in a system where there are great delays in how everything is managed, ultimately moving America further towards what we see as the inefficiencies of socialistic planning, where individual responsibility is taken away and people are forced to be responsible for the situations of others, regardless of whether they truly believe that the way in which they are claimed to be helping the poor are actually efficient, or whether they will simply decrease the quality of healthcare for basically everyone. We need to look at this system on a Leviathan way, and we need to look at it through an idea of merit over demand. The Leviathan system would best state that we need to do what benefits the whole of society, and it will not benefit the whole of society to go on universal health care. It will not benefit the whole of society to go on Medicare for all. And most importantly, this is one that I believe we need to step up to the plate, as I stated in my first episode about don't moderate, don't give up, because they'll just keep pushing for more. The elimination of Obamacare is something that very few politicians in the past 4 years have ever talked about, even on the right wing. It is still in place. The individual mandates repeal was a huge victory because now people are not forced to give up additional money for not buying Obamacare government insurance, but it is still in place. All of its other provisions that are likely costing healthcare companies that are trying to provide healthcare to people far more money to keep their operations afloat, that are likely canceling far more healthcare programs, that are far more making the system far more inefficient with increased regulations that sometimes are not even necessary. We need to take a look at all three of these disastrous programs, one of which has already been put into place, and two of which are simply proposals from far-left dreamers, and see that these will not do the benefits they think they will. It is a good thought, and perhaps a nice thought, that they think that these programs should be enacted because they would provide a great benefit to the poor of this nation and those who cannot afford their own health care. But simply put, we can see that these systems only serve the problems of taking away from those who have without their consent and taking all of that money through this single-payer system into something that is not efficient at all and that likely will only serve to cause our Leviathan system to become more and more disjointed as people lose trust in their government due to the fact that government, in this case, from increased regulations, will be harming their access to healthcare by overregulating it rather than helping it by allowing the free market to thrive in a way in which people do have some assistance if they are a meritable person like a veteran or a senior who deserve to get some assistance from the government, although we need to manage, of course, how much that is run with bureaucracy to avoid veering into socialism, versus a system where the demands of far-left college students who simply think that they should get all of these things for free without taking into account that it will not be free, and they, along with millions of others of wealthier people, will be seeing their money dissipate into this system that will only serve to greatly decrease the quality of healthcare in the United States. For this reason, I'd like to state here today that our solution to this idea, to these socialistic ideas, are to reject them, but to see that both parties can do more when it comes to being genuinely compassionate about balancing the ideas of helping those who are downcasted and meritable and need help, whilst also preserving the quality and freedom of our system without veering into socialism. Thank you.